Yep.
Yep.
Okay, all right. We're going to be starting right at noon today in the interest of time. Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Smith, the current president of PSALA and the firm administrator for Jameson Peppelcam 2. This is the fourth session of PSALA's Wellness, the New Professional Priority Series. Today, David Bruce will be presenting Dealing with Substance Abuse and Addiction. Please feel free to post any questions you have in the chat area or the Q&A section. There will also be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Dave is a return presenter with PSALA, and he definitely captured our attention with his previous presentation. We have all heard about the increasing numbers of addiction due to COVID. And with the increased numbers in the legal industry in general, this is very timely and needed. Dave Bruce has been a Seattle attorney for 35 years. He is very active in recovery and is a WSBA Wellness Program peer advisor, has completed the CCAR Recovery Coach Academy, and has completed part 1 of the Washington DSHS Certified Peer Counselor Training. He has also been in recovery for 13 years, and his passion is assisting addicts in maintaining recovery. In his day job, he is a lawyer in private practice and is a graduate of Cornell Law School. Please welcome Dave Bruce.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Amy and Veronica, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I'm grateful for the opportunity. My name is Dave, and I'm an alcoholic and an addict in recovery. That is my primary identity, and I hope to make that clear, to explain that as we go through this hour and a half presentation and I hope discussion. I told my wife a few minutes ago that I was going to be speaking for an hour and a half, and she said, "Dear God." And I said, "Look, I'm happy to talk for an hour and a half. I love listening to myself, but I really feel sorry for these folks. So if you want to save yourselves, feel free to ask questions. I think you can do that via a Q&A and or chat feature. It'll work best if you direct them to Amy or Veronica if you're using the chat, because I'm going to be trying to focus on speaking. In addition to being an addict and an alcoholic in recovery, I am, as Michelle mentioned, a lawyer. More important than that, I'm a husband. And I'm a father. My 26-year-old son is actually living here with me near Port Townsend. You're in my home office with me. He's on the other side of the wall right over there. And that is something that would not be happening had I not gotten into recovery. He's 26, young, handsome, smart, engaged, sober. And I was reflecting earlier about what I was doing when I was 26, which is 34 years ago. I'm 60 now. And what I was doing just about exactly 34 years ago was, trigger alert, I was smoking crack in an alley in downtown Seattle with a couple of crackheads I had never met before I wandered into the alley, and they asked me if I wanted some, and I said, sure. I was also, at that time, a lawyer, a much younger lawyer. I had a job at actually a very prestigious law firm, a good job. And I was married. And I had, by all external, accounts, a great life. And yet there I was, smoking crack in an alley. Just to finish out that vignette, the way I got there was, well, I was actually a marijuana addict at the time, and I had become convinced. So this was back in the late 80s, and it was illegal then. And I had put myself in a situation where I couldn't get it easily. I did that on purpose because I didn't have the ability to control my use myself. So I was in a situation where I couldn't get it easily, and yet I desperately wanted it. So I persuaded myself that I could go buy it on the street because, a competent young man ought to be able to do that. And so I went to a bar on First Avenue near the market, and I spotted a likely looking fellow and said, "Hey, do you know where I could get some marijuana?" And he said, "Sure, give me some money." And I gave him 40 bucks. And I waited outside the bar, and he came back out in a minute and handed me a paper bag, and I was elated. And then I opened up the paper bag, and what was inside the paper bag was another paper bag rolled up, and no marijuana whatsoever. So then I was furious and really sick because I really needed to get high. So I walked back to my office. I was really literally, 100 feet from the front door of this prestigious law firm, and I saw these crackheads in the alley, and I thought, maybe they can help me. So I approached them. They offered me some crack. I tried that. I was not a regular, in fact, I had never used crack before or since, but I was desperate to get high, absolutely desperate. That's just one of the embarrassing and distressing things that occurred in the course of my 29 years as a practicing addict and alcoholic. And the thing that's extraordinary about that vignette, as I look back on it 34 years later, is that wasn't the last straw. That wasn't the bottom of my addiction. That wasn't what persuaded me I needed to get help. In fact, the truth of the matter was that was more or less the beginning. I had started smoking pot a few years earlier in undergraduate school. I didn't have addiction in my family. I didn't have a particularly unhealthy upbringing. I was a bright and capable young fellow. I went away to college, and college was it was very distressing for me. I had some form of a nervous breakdown my freshman year in college, really over a lack of a sense of meaning. It doesn't make sense to me looking back on it now, but I was a mess. I couldn't leave my room. The next summer after my freshman year, I decided to try marijuana. I decided to try marijuana because I thought it would help me fit in. And the first time I did it, it sort of freaked me out. I was paranoid and had an uncomfortable experience. And the second time and all of the other times, I just absolutely loved it. I just loved it. And I knew right away that I felt like I had come home. I felt like I had solved all my problems. I felt like I didn't need to worry anymore about the things that were making me so sick in the head. I felt like I could fit in, and I felt comfortable in my own skin. And I knew right away that I couldn't stop using it. I knew right away that I liked it too much, and I knew right away that it had bad side effects for me. I was fine when I was high. I mean, I was stupid and forgetful, but I was what I wanted to be, which was sort of euphoric and in the moment. The problem for me was the only gift I've been given is the ability to speak relatively fluently on my feet. And after I'd had pot for a few days in a row, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that the next day, even when I was not high. And I knew that right away too. I knew that was a problem, and I knew I couldn't stop it. I knew I had an incipient addiction. Even I was 18. So really early on. And what happened next was a long series of behaviors where I tried to figure out a way to manage this addiction. Mostly what that involved for me, as I mentioned earlier that I had put myself in a situation where I couldn't access pot. Mostly what that involved for me was creating situations where I couldn't get to my drug of choice. So, after a few years of college and, actually managing to more or less function in college. I mean, not functioning the way I wonder if I could have had I not gone down that path, but passing, in fact, getting good grades, in fact, getting honors, I still couldn't figure out why I was on the planet or what the purpose of my life was. I still struggled with this lack of a sense of meaning. I didn't go to law school because I felt called to go to law school. I went to law school because I needed a job. And I also moved away to go to law school to get away from my sources of supply. So I moved to another city so I couldn't access my drug of choice. And that worked for a while. And then what happened is I still needed to get altered. I still needed to get messed up in order to be comfortable in my skin. And so I started to drink more. And it's not like I was alone. I was at law school, and there was plenty of heavy drinking going on around me. And the problem is, in order to get get using alcohol as high as marijuana was getting me, I needed to drink a lot. And I did. And eventually I found another supply of marijuana, which I always was able to do sooner or later. And so what happened, and I repeated this pattern several times. So eventually I graduated from law school. I moved to Seattle, and again, put myself in a position where I didn't have ready access to a source of supply. And again, I drank more. What would always happen to me after some number of months is I'd be drinking a lot and smoking a lot of pot. And, at this point in the legal profession in Seattle, it was still not unusual for lawyers to go out and get drunk in the middle of the day, certainly on Fridays. So, Friday afternoons were a wasteland because I would go out and get drunk with other people from the office, and then that would sort of set off the pattern for the rest of the weekend. I say often, and this is true, if I could have figured out how to only get high, I don't want to come across as an anti-marijuana zealot. I recognize both marijuana and alcohol are legal. I recognize there are lots of people in the world who can use both marijuana and alcohol, or at least one or the other, in a healthy and adult manner. I happen not to be one of those persons. If I could smoke marijuana on Saturday nights and just smoke marijuana on Saturday nights and not all of the other nights and afternoons and mornings, I wouldn't be here. Somebody else would be speaking to you, because I would take that deal today if it was available to me, but it is not. My problem, and this is only part of my problem, but my problem is once I start smoking marijuana or drinking alcohol, I can't stop. And what I'm going to talk about today is sort of the nature of that problem and the nature of some of the solutions. I'll talk just a little bit more about myself. I don't mean to make this the Dave show, but I do want to establish my bona fides. I have lived this experience, and if any of you 45 people have struggled with addiction or think you might be struggling with addiction, I want you to know there's somebody here who has lived this experience. So my pattern was I would put myself in a situation where I simply couldn't access my drug of choice. And then what happened is I would drink more. So I worked at a prestigious law firm. That's where I was working when the crack smoking incident occurred. After a few years of that, I got more and more admired in my addiction. And eventually I quit. I quit because I was so depressed and anxious when I wasn't drunk and stoned. That I just couldn't tolerate it anymore. It was a great job, a great law firm, a terrific situation. And I walked into my boss's office one morning, hungover, and said, "Look, I can't do this anymore." And I quit. And then I went and took a job as a King County deputy prosecuting attorney in 1988. And part of my job in that situation was to prosecute misdemeanor possession of marijuana. And even I am not sufficiently hypocritical to prosecute misdemeanor possession of marijuana during the day and then go home and get high as a kite at night. So for a period of time while I held that job, I stopped smoking marijuana. And and this is my pattern, I drank more. Um, and that went on. I moved a couple of more times. I took a couple of more jobs. Same pattern, trying to get away from my drug, drinking more. And by the time I was in my late 20s, I was well and truly addicted to both marijuana, which had been true for a while, and to alcohol as well. So I became an alcoholic, trying to use alcohol to manage my marijuana addiction. Not recommended. If any of you are trying that, or also not recommended, trying to use marijuana to manage your alcohol addiction. My observation is that doesn't really work either. So I was on the road to, to a bad destination. I was on a highway to a bad destination. One of the things you'll hear folks who have been in recovery for a while say is it's, the destination is jails, hospitals, or the grave. I mean, it is not a happy ending with this disease. Just literally an hour before getting on this call, a good friend of mine told me that a dear friend of his had died 2 days ago from his alcoholism, from his untreated alcoholism. I have a fatal and progressive illness, and I didn't really believe that at the time. And so by the time I was in my late 20s, I was on a road that goes to a bad destination. And the truth is, I missed a number of the exits. Some of the exits that I missed were smoking crack in an alley with people that I had never met before. Another exit I missed was the collapse of my first marriage. My first wife left me. Without explaining why, although the hint she gave me was the guy she left me for was clean and sober and in recovery. So, put the pieces together. I passed the exit that said, don't steal from your friends. I passed the exit that said, don't associate with known felons because they might provide you drugs. I, as a young father, brought known felons into my house because I thought I might be able to get drugs from them. And I passed the exit that was the near destruction of my second marriage. In 2003, my wife served me with divorce papers, and the central allegation in the papers was, he's an alcoholic. I love him, but he's an alcoholic. And she moved out, she took the kids, and she bought her own house. We miraculously reconciled, but I continued to drink and use for 4 more years. I guess the things that I feel, I still feel remorse about these things, are, I was a bad parent. I had kids I was 34 and 36 when my 2 sons were born, and I didn't get sober until I was 47. So I not only practiced law as an impaired lawyer for over 2 decades, but I damaged my children. And I damaged them not in particular by anything I did while drunk and stoned, but rather I set up a life that I could barely manage sober. And so I would come home. I'm a litigator. I'm a trial lawyer, and I always have been. And I would come home at the end of a difficult day, and I was usually sober during the day. I would get home at 6:30 or 7 in the evening to little kids and a wife who had some desire for some social contact as well. And I felt like that was a burden. And I felt like the only way that I could, quote, deal with being a parent was to get drunk and stoned. And that's what I did. I was not present to my family. And if I wasn't drunk and stoned, I was really an unpleasant person, because one of the characteristics of my illness was that it made me considerably more difficult to be around when I wasn't high. I was angry, impatient, and temperamental, just difficult. So all of that went on for quite a while. If you spend any time with addicts and alcoholics, you'll hear all kinds of different stories of how bad things had to get before they were ready to heal. For me, it was actually not dramatic. I am embarrassed that the collapse of my first marriage and the near collapse of the second was not enough. I'm embarrassed that I missed so many exits on that road. But for me, what finally happened was I became pretty convinced I wasn't going to be able to continue to earn a living because I just was not really able to function. I was hungover and in that mood state I just described at work most of the time. And you can't actually do this job in a impaired mood state, and feeling depressed, feeling sluggish all the time. And the other thing that happened was a dear friend, former drinking buddy, former boss, and client of mine took me out for dinner and told me that he had gotten sober. I was shocked when he didn't drink. I asked him if he was sick, and he said, "No, I'm not. I'm sober. I'm sober, and I've been going to 12-step meetings, and my life is transformed." And at that point, I said, yeah, I may need to take a look at this too. It took another 9 months, but I finally got to a place where it was a Friday, and I was looking at having to take a deposition on a Monday of an important witness in an important case. And I said to myself, you need to stay sober this weekend so that you can do this on Monday. And I heard a voice in my head say, you can't and you won't. And for whatever reason, after 29 years of using, that got my attention and scared me enough that on Monday morning, I picked up the phone and I didn't drink that weekend. No, that's not true. I did drink that weekend. I did drink that weekend. But on Monday, having proven I was right, I picked up the phone and I called this guy and I said, what about this program you've been telling me about? Will you help me? Will you help me? And he took me to a meeting. That was September 11, 2007. And I haven't had a drink and I haven't had a drug since, period. I was desperate. At the end of my first, it was an AA meeting. At the end of my first AA meeting, which, and by the way, and I'll talk more about this, it was an AA meeting of lawyers. It was a group called the UNBAR. And I'll come back to this later. But at the end of the meeting, I was completely persuaded that I had the same thing that the other people in the room had. You know, there were, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 20 people in the room, and they told stories, and their stories sounded just like mine. And I was terrified because I knew I couldn't keep doing what I was doing and I had to stop. And I knew equally certainly I could not stop of my own accord. A guy came up to me at the end of the meeting. He said, let's go have coffee. I thought that was very, very odd for a man I didn't know to ask me to coffee. It made me pretty uncomfortable, but I went. And he said, you don't ever have to feel this way ever again. Here's what we're going to do. Call me every day. Make a list of things you're grateful for. Get a copy of this book, which I'll talk about a little bit, and let's talk through it. I'll help you. And he did, and it completely transformed my life. I'll talk a little more about this later, but it in itself, going to a meeting didn't make me stop drinking. What made me stop drinking was I was terrified. That's what made me stop drinking. I was terrified and I was motivated. What the work that I'll talk a little more about has done for me is it's allowed me to continue to not drink, to not drink today, even though life keeps coming at me, even though weird shit that I don't like happens in the world all the time, including in my legal practice. I'm able to now deal with being a human on the planet without resorting to drugs and alcohol. Some people can do that at baseline. Some people apparently are able to do that without help, but I have needed a lot of help. So now we are to the disclaimers portion of the program. I am not a doctor or a treatment professional. I am a lawyer, but I am not giving you any legal advice. So don't take any legal actions or not take any legal actions based on anything I say. And I'm not here representing my law firm. In fact, I'm not even going to tell you what law firm I work for. You can figure it out if you're really interested, but I don't think it matters at all. I'm also not here to push a particular approach to recovery. You will hear me talk a lot about 12-step recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous because that's what worked for me. But I'm familiar with a lot of other approaches, and I'm going to talk about those too. I'm really just going to share what I've learned, and the things I'm going to talk about are addiction in the legal profession. I'm going to talk a little bit about addiction during the pandemic. I'm going to talk about sort of what addiction looks like and barriers to healing. And then I'm going to talk about the solutions. I have some slides, but mostly, sadly for you, you're just going to be listening to me talking. The slides will be available through the PSALA either during the presentation or afterwards. And there are some pretty good resources in there. Let's see if I can screen share here. I want to start by talking a little bit about the prevalence. Okay, did that work? Are we seeing Dave's screen? Not yet. How's that? There we go. Okay, good. So I want to start by talking a little bit about the prevalence of addiction in the legal profession. This is maybe something everybody knows, so I'm not going to linger on this. It was news to me when I learned this a few years ago. So there, 21 to 36% of I think this is of lawyers rather than persons who work in law firms, but I'll talk a little more about this later, but I think that all persons working in law firms are vulnerable to these problems. So 21 to 36% are problem drinkers, 28% struggle with depression, and I believe they also have higher rates of suicidality than the population at large. There's some pretty good information available from the ABA, which has done a fair amount of work and commissioned some really good work. This first statistic comes from, a peer-reviewed study in the Journal of Addiction Medicine. This is not, anecdotal evidence. This is actually the case. And what's interesting to me about this is that these numbers compare to numbers that are roughly half this prevalence rate in the population at large. So to be clear, the key takeaway is lawyers are roughly twice as likely to suffer from addiction problems or mental illness problems as the baseline population. And I think that's true for suicidality as well. Why? Why do we have a problem? And, this is possibly obvious to most of you, but I think it bears touching on. There are, I think, a number of factors that make lawyers and those in the profession generally uniquely vulnerable. We can do our work in isolation, and many of us prefer to do so. I was taught very early in my career that my job was not to go to my bosses or colleagues and ask them what I should be doing or how to solve the problem. My job was to have them throw a problem into my office. I figure out one or more solutions, then I come to them and present to them what I think is the best solution and then enact it. And I learned early on, both in law school, through the sort of rigors of the Socratic method and in a demanding litigation practice with working for, lawyers who had been in practice for many, many years, whatever I came up with was going to be subject to some pretty intense scrutiny. So you better have it figured out before you come into my office. So what do lawyers do? A lot of lawyers sit in their offices and try to solve problems all by themselves. That I don't actually think humans are designed to do that at baseline. And I think that's one of the reasons that we have higher rates of addiction. Another is this, maybe all of you have heard this. I still love it. Being a heart surgeon is difficult enough. Being a heart surgeon where you are, trying to save somebody's life and you're performing a complicated and difficult procedure that takes everything you have is hard enough. Much harder if your job is being a heart surgeon and there's another equally capable surgeon on the other side of the table who is trying to kill the same patient you're trying to save. And certainly in the practice of litigation anyway, and I think this is true in much of the legal field, there's somebody else on the other side of the case or problem who is saying that everything I say is wrong. So the adversarial nature of the business is very difficult. The way in which the business model works, where we in many cases are charging dollars for time put in, makes the workers hour generating machines, and that certainly can be dehumanizing, and it also leads to heavy workload. Many firms, certainly back when I started practicing, and I think to this day, have a work hard, play hard ethic. And I think in many places in the legal profession, drinking just remains sort of the way to blow off steam. And I don't mean to be a zealot. That's fine for some people. There are definitely people who can do that and for whom that works without a lot of adverse consequences. But for those who are prone to addiction, being put in that environment is difficult. If you're not already familiar with Andrew Benjamin, he is I know he holds positions at the University of Washington. He is a professor, he's also a lawyer, and he has done a fair amount of research on the phenomenon that law students come into law school just like the baseline population, and they exit law school displaying the characteristics that I put up in the first slide. And so it appears, and you hear people talk about this in groups of lawyers with drinking problems, that law school contributes to the building of a culture that, to use a two-bit word, potentiates problems with addiction. The other problem I want to mention, because this is important, is I don't think these problems are limited to lawyers. People who work in law firms, whether they are folks who are in the billing function or in other staff functions, or who are paralegals, or who are legal assistants, or any other position, also are vulnerable to these problems, partly because they are culturally determined, partly because we are in organizations that tend to be very hardworking, and partly because it is stressful enough to be a lawyer. It is even more stressful to be in this situation where you have less control. The lawyer, at least in most instances, has the ability to sort of manage what's going on. Less so the paralegal, and less so still the legal assistant. And so they are, I think, subject to very similar stresses and pressures, but with sort of less control over their environment. And I think that makes things difficult. So that is the prevalence of addiction in the legal profession. Now, I want to touch on something I don't have any slides about, but I think it's been really interesting to watch this unfold, and that is addiction during the pandemic. I don't know if anybody remembers what the marquee public health problem was, the sort of poster child public health problem was before COVID. We now have one public health problem we are focused on. But if I had asked anybody in this digital room a year ago, what is our biggest public health problem right now, 9 out of 10 of you would have said it was the opiate epidemic, because in fact that was our biggest public health problem before we entered the COVID era. Excuse me. Well, guess what? That problem didn't go away. That problem actually got worse during the pandemic. There's if you Google opiate overdoses in 2020, you'll rapidly come to a CDC site that shows that there was a significant increase in overdose deaths. I didn't do a lot of research on this, but I can tell you that anecdotally, my observation is addicts all over the place and addicts with all different kinds of problems have suffered more during the pandemic than previously. There are, I think, several fairly obvious reasons for that. I think the biggest one actually is the first thing I talked about on the last slide, which is isolation. Addiction and its cousin, depression, are in significant measure diseases of isolation and sort of in a vicious cycle sort of a way. So speaking for myself, and this is true not of all drinkers, but many, the way I like to drink was to be left alone in my house so I could drink as much as I wanted without hurting anybody. And so for me, what I wanted to do was to basically crawl up in a hole and practice my addiction. And that's not unusual for an addict. That's actually normal behavior. So, and then being isolated sort of feeds into making you more likely to practice your addiction if you're able to do so. And I think that has been very difficult for many addicts. And there's been all kinds of anecdotal reporting about, wine sales going through the roof and that sort of thing. And I think that's sort of a second contributor to this disease getting worse during the pandemic is that we as a culture view this as a socially acceptable response to stress. It's legitimately been hard to deal with what's been coming at us during 2020 on all sorts of levels and for all sorts of reasons. If I have an extra glass of wine, if I have an extra bottle of wine, so what? At least I'm not fill in the blank doing some other horrible thing. And that kind of thinking is more or less socially sanctioned. And again, fine for some people, doesn't work if you are an alcoholic or an addict at baseline. Things are going to get worse. And I think the other thing that has made our problems with addiction more significant during the pandemic have been access to treatment and access to help. I'm going to talk a fair amount about 12-step meetings a little later on, but there have been at least a couple of problems. One is treatment centers have either shut down or limited their programs. Because those involve putting a bunch of people in a confined space, it's just not been a safe thing to do. And similarly, historically, what a 12-step meeting is 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 people in a church basement or a community center somewhere sitting around in a circle or in folding chairs in rows talking. Well, that's the last thing you want to do during a pandemic. There have been solutions to that, and it's been fascinating to see what happens. And they have worked for some people, including me. But there are a lot of folks who have really struggled with the sort of loss of human contact and human connectedness that the pandemic has pushed on us. So which is the long way of saying we have a serious problem in the legal profession. We have, I think the problem has been exacerbated in the last year, and it's a problem that we need to address. There's 43 participants here. If 20% of us have had a problem with addiction, there's 8 or 9 people on this call that themselves have or are wrestling with an issue with addiction. In addition, there's another group of people who have wrestled, will wrestle, or are wrestling with a problem with somebody in their orbit who is struggling with addiction. Somebody else in the workplace, somebody who works for them, a boss, a spouse, a kid, a parent. So this is touching all of us. And so what I want to talk about now is what addiction looks like, how do we identify it, and barriers to healing. And I find this part of the conversation the most challenging part, and that is because the sort of two different audiences I just identified, they're different issues. So if you are yourself someone who is struggling with addiction or thinks you might, do I have a drinking problem? That kind of thing. That's one conversation. And I find that a pretty easy conversation to have. The second conversation, what do I do if my boss, employee, coworker, spouse, kid, parent seems to be wrestling with addiction? How do I know if they really have an addiction problem, and what should I do to help them? That is a much more difficult conversation. I'm going to touch on both, but in some sense, the former is easier than the latter. When we try to start to address addiction, we come up immediately against two very difficult problems, and those problems are stigma and denial. So I want to talk first about stigma. So the prevailing theory these days, and this has been true for, gosh, close to a century now, certainly since sort of the AA phenomenon, and actually I think somewhat before that, the prevailing theory of addiction is that it is a disease. It is not a disease that is precisely like, say, cancer or MS, but that is the prevailing theoretical model. And if you accept that, and it is, by the way, the model that I believe in, I think that is the most useful, healthy, and productive way to think about addiction. If you believe in that model, then the stigma doesn't make any sense. Because if I told you that I had diabetes, you would not think I was a bad person for having diabetes. You would think that I was a person who maybe should monitor his blood sugar level and take insulin. And that's probably about as much as you would think about it. And maybe you would try to make sure that you did whatever you could to support me in that. But you wouldn't think, what the hell is wrong with that guy? Why does he keep not taking his insulin? So why do we have stigma surrounding issues of addiction? I think it's because we have not fully gotten over the older way of thinking about addiction or drunkenness, to use an older word. And that is, well, it's just a character failing. It's just a character failing. You're weak-willed. If you would just straighten up and fly right, you'd be fine. Why can't you just stop at one? A lot of this book is an attempt to dispel. This book, by the way, is what's called the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I will come back to that, but if you really believe that it is a disease process of some sort rather than a character failing, the stigma doesn't make sense. Notice though that and looking at my own reactions, I see different reactions to different disease processes. Let's say that I had an uncle who had smoked for his entire life, and then he died of lung cancer. That lung cancer is a disease, but he made I would have the thought he made a series of lifestyle choices that led to it, and I might be sort of judgy about that. Not in a productive way, frankly, but I could have that reaction. I firmly believe that alcoholism is a disease, and yet if I start looking at people who have trouble with other drugs, I sometimes find myself in a judgmental reaction. I heard somebody say an addiction medicine doctor say just the day before yesterday, around the opiate epidemic, we've had actually a lot of public education where we've come to understand that a lot of the opiate epidemic results from overprescription and people more or less without fault getting hooked on opiates, which then ruined their lives and led them to end up on heroin. And we have come to a place of greater compassion and a greater ability to see opiate addiction as a disease, much less so, this addiction medicine doctor said, around methamphetamine, because nobody's ever prescribed anybody methamphetamine. And, everybody knows you shouldn't take meth, that'll kill you. So a long-winded way of saying, I believe the stigma is misplaced. And one of the reasons I'm very happy to have this conversation, I'm very happy to sit down with you and say, when I was in active addiction, I smoked crack in an alley outside my law firm, is I need people to hear that this is a disease. It will make you do all kinds of crazy things, and it is treatable if you just take the medicine. I recognize that there are characterological aspects to it, but I don't think it's particularly helpful to dwell on it. I think we're more likely to get to useful healing if we can put the stigma aside. And I think the best way to do that is to have people who are in stable recovery talk about what it really looked like when they weren't, and to talk about this disease model. I want to talk now a little bit about denial, the other, I think, huge barrier. By the way, so just to close the circle though, so why is stigma a problem? Stigma is a problem because if you feel like what you're doing reflects you being a bad person or a weak person, you're going to be much less likely to stick up your hand and say, I need help. And that's the key to all of this, is I need help. And that's why I think it's so important for those in recovery to sort of open the door to that. That's what happened to me. Somebody told me he had put up his hand and needed help, and it made it easier for me to do that. The other thing with addiction is that, like some mental illnesses, it is a disease that says you don't have a disease. So the example I've seen most pointedly around this, I've had relationships with several people who had bipolar disorder, and to a person, when they were in the manic phase of their illness, they felt great. They felt great. And if you tried to tell them that it might be helpful to take some medication, that this was not going to end well, and that they should probably do what their doctor told them, their response was, unlike telling a diabetic they ought to take their insulin, their response was, I'm fine. What's the matter with you? Leave me alone. I don't have a problem. And addiction can be like that too. Addiction can be like that too. The denial is not a universal characteristic of the disease, but it's a pronounced feature of the disease, and it is more sort of prominent in some environments. And those environments will include places like law firms, where disability or weakness are, disfavored, let's say. Law firms prize strength. Law firms prize winning. So a difficult place to stick your hand up and say, I have a stigmatized condition, and that encourages denial. The other thing that's interesting, and I've worked with many, many lawyers who are trying to recover from addiction. Most of them say, I was a high functioning lawyer. I was doing my job. And that's part of my story. I mean, I was a practicing lawyer at an excellent law firm in the prosecutor's office. I started my own law firm. I did a bunch of things. I won cases. I met deadlines, and I did all of that as a practicing addict. So it can be very hard for those people even to admit to themselves that they have a problem when they're continuing to function. And that raises an interesting question, right? Which is, okay, well, if this person is functioning, who cares? Like maybe they're fine. So what if he drinks 5 drinks every night and has a couple of bong hits? I mean, if he's getting up in the morning and taking a great deposition and the client's happy and you're getting paid, what's the problem? He's just managing his life. And the answer to that is there's a lot of collateral damage. That was certainly my story. I was actually able to function at the office to a large extent. That was slipping away, but I was able to function to a large extent, but I was destroying my family. And also, it is a fatal and progressive illness. People die of alcoholism. No, by the way, nobody dies of marijuana addiction. That is not a thing. In my case, as I already explained, the marijuana led to a harder drug, which in my case was alcohol. I mean, I literally this morning heard, I think I already said this, I literally this morning heard of another story of somebody dying of alcoholism. It happens a lot. And people certainly die of opiate addiction, and people certainly die, on meth. So it kills people. That's a reason to care, even if they appear to be functional. So how do you get past the stigma and denial? The questions are, so let's say that if you yourself are struggling with addiction, or there's somebody in your environment, in your circle that you think might be, how do you bring the situation into the light in order to heal, in order to help? First couple of things I'm going to say are addressed to anybody who might be wondering if they have an issue. So if you're having the thought, I wonder if I have a drinking problem, that's kind of diagnostic in itself. Like I can promise you that nobody who doesn't have a drinking problem ever wonders if they have a drinking problem. But here's my example. When I was in the middle of it, I read something in a People magazine or some stupid pop culture source that said, well, a man can drink 14 drinks a week and he doesn't have a drinking problem. So you start counting drinks, right? Okay, well, I can have 2. If you're counting your drinks, you might want to wonder about things. If you find yourself in a 12-step room, for almost any reason, you may have a problem. People don't accidentally come into the rooms of, Alcoholics Anonymous or any other recovery program. If somebody who you love says, I'm concerned about your drinking, or this is impacting our relationship, maybe you want to look at it. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see if I can do this. I'll go quickly through this, but so I think I mentioned I go to a program called Marijuana Anonymous, in addition to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love these. These are the Marijuana Anonymous 12 questions. So these are read at the beginning of every meeting of Marijuana Anonymous. They may help you determine whether marijuana is a problem in your life. Has smoking pot stopped being fun? Do you ever get high alone? Is it hard for you to imagine a life without marijuana? Do you find your friends are determined by your marijuana use? Do you pick your friends based on, who you like getting high with? Do you use marijuana to avoid dealing with your problems? By the way, if this isn't already obvious, you can insert alcohol or your drug of choice in where it says pot or marijuana. Do you smoke pot to cope with your feelings? Does your marijuana use let you live in a privately defined world? Have you ever failed to keep promises you made? I love this one. Has your use of marijuana ever caused problems with memory, concentration, or motivation? When your stash is nearly empty, do you feel anxious or worried about how to get more? You can tell that these questions were written before it was legal in Washington, because nobody worries about that anymore. Do you plan your life around your marijuana use, and have friends or relatives ever complained that your using is damaging your relationship with them? If you answered yes to any of the above questions, you may have a problem with marijuana. Let me tell you, if you answered, so here's the thing. I answer yes to all of those questions, literally all of them, except for the first one, which is, has smoking pot stopped being fun? It never stopped being fun for me. But yeah, if you answer yes to, say, 11 of those questions, not only may you have a problem with marijuana or whatever your drug of choice is, you do. So I like that. AA is, AA also has an approach to self-diagnosis, to assessing whether you have a problem with alcohol. It's in the book. Without belaboring it, I'll tell you the question is really, can you stop drinking when you want to stop drinking? Can you stop drinking when you know you need to stop drinking? Can you stop drinking and not start drinking again? Can you go into a bar and not drink? There's a lot more like that, but many of us get well past that point and know that we need help. Now, as I said a moment ago, the things we've talked about so far are about self-diagnosis. I think it is important to be much more careful when trying to determine whether somebody else has a problem with a substance, let's say a coworker. Why? Well, speaking for myself, I'm not a doctor. I believe this is a disease, and I'm not a doctor, and I'm not competent to diagnose other people. And frankly, the teaching of the recovery programs that I have been engaged in is more or less, you don't diagnose other people. You wait until they are ready to be helped. Wait until they ask for help. I think that is terrific advice. And the other thing that is worth thinking about is having, if somebody has to have a conversation with somebody who you think might have a problem, consider having it be somebody like me, or somebody else who is an addict in recovery, because an addict is the person who is best situated to build trust with another addict. An addict is the person who is best situated to create hope for another addict. And an addict is the person who is best situated to reduce the stigma barrier. When I have to have a conversation with another addict in the workplace, and I have done that more than once, the first thing I do is I say, well, this is what happened to me. Anything you want to talk about? So for all of those reasons, I am a huge advocate of what I would call generally broadly the peer support model of recovery. I think it is important to have peer support available to those who may be interested in recovery. And beyond that, I think that we need to be very careful, again, about diagnosing others and about pushing others into treatment. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I guess I do want to give you a couple of other, I recognize this is incomplete. I recognize that part of what at least some of you came for is I want tools to recognize an addict when I'm seeing one. So a couple of resources. Hang on just a second. So I actually just looked at this, getting ready to do this presentation for you. I have been really surprised and impressed, actually, at the level of resource that's available on the Washington State Bar Association website. So just a plug for them. The Washington State Bar Association does have a program that's used to be called the Lawyer's Assistance Program. It is now called the, I think, Wellness Program or something like that. The program lead is a gentleman named Dan Crystal. I think he's terrific. I don't think he's with the Bar Association full time, but he's a therapist. He's got addiction expertise. He has a private practice, and he's a good resource. And he maintains a robust relationship with the addiction community. So this link takes you to something that's on the wellness program part of the site. and it has a bunch of resources on identification of addiction and related materials. It's got, I think, I believe this first one, for example, takes you to the it's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM. I think it's the DSM-5 now, if my memory's right. So what the medical community says is addiction. There are also on this site, at this next link, under online assessments, there are, I think, 3 online self-assessment tools that are available. So there's, for example, I think it's called the audit tool, one of the tools on this site. You just hop on their website and you check some boxes, and it either tells you, you know, you're at low risk for drinking, or you have you've got a severe drinking problem, get help immediately. So there are, these are, well, I frankly don't think either of these tools, any of these tools, are as good as having the person you're concerned about connect to an addict in recovery, honestly. But they're not bad. They're not bad. They're worth taking a look at. And aside on this, also on the WSBA site, there's a video of a presentation a lawyer named Will Miller gave a few years ago, really just telling his story, sort of doing what I did at for the first 10 or 15 minutes, and how he recovered, and it's riveting, and it's quite good. He's a really good speaker, and it's about methamphetamine, and that is, I think, pretty important, because that is a particularly difficult addiction. But so here's the point I want to come back to. I think it is important to be careful about attempting to diagnose other folks. Again, I am not a doctor. Why would I try to determine whether somebody else has alcoholism or marijuana addiction or opiate addiction, unless I'm trying to make them do something? You know, unless I'm trying to make them do something, and I want to tell them what's good for them. And the problem with that is, in my experience and in my opinion, telling other people what's wrong with them and what they need to do about it is typically ineffective. It certainly has not worked for me with my children. It never works for me with, say, my spouse. Not at all. It is, in fact, actively counterproductive. And there's that same risk when you're dealing with an addict. When you're dealing with somebody who has a disease we've already agreed is stigmatized and who's likely in denial about it. Now, I am not saying at all, I am not saying that if somebody is not doing their job in the workplace that there shouldn't be consequences. I am not saying that. I am not saying that addiction should be ignored or coddled. You know, if somebody's not able to do, what is the employment law term, I think, is critical job elements or something like that. If somebody's not able to do their job, if they can't do their job or they can't do important aspects of their job, then you need to deal with that problem. But it's like any other disability. You know, if they want to get help, and if they want an accommodation for in order to help them treat this problem, that's great. And you, as an employer, here I go giving legal advice, which I have disclaimed, but you know, if they want to get help and are trying to get help for their disability or their disease, well, you probably ought to accommodate that. But otherwise, you've got to manage their performance. I'm not saying you have to ignore a performance problem. What I am saying is that forcing people into treatment and trying to identify, you know, which I think really, you know, diagnosing somebody else is really a part of that, is going to be of limited effectiveness in most cases. I think that, again, if what we're talking about is treatment for a disease, what you want is for the person who has the disease to be motivated to engage in their own treatment. You know, you want the diabetic to be motivated to take their insulin and to monitor their blood sugar. You want the person who has got COPD to be motivated to stop smoking, and you want the alcoholic or the addict to understand that they have a problem. You want them to think that they have a problem themselves and to think that they need help. There is such a thing as involuntary treatment, of course, for for mental illnesses. That's always been the case. That is also, I think, in many cases, of pretty limited effectiveness. There is recently, within the last 2 years, the legal possibility of involuntary treatment for substance abuse or substance use disorder. It's called Ricky's Law. It was enacted in Washington in 2018, and it essentially allows, I think, community mental health workers or some such designee to determine that somebody is creating a grave risk to their own health through their addiction, and to be, committed to some sort of involuntary treatment. The problem is we don't have adequate inpatient treatment beds that will take those people to cover those people. So the law is of not much use. So my bottom line is the treatment solutions are going to work best when you have somebody who's motivated to engage and who wants to engage. So let us say that either you, my listener, are somebody who wants to address their own addiction, or that you're dealing with somebody in the workplace who wants help. So how can we help? Again, I think we will help best when the person is highly motivated. Interestingly, I got a question. I got a question before this presentation about someone has a relationship with a person who they think needs help that the person is not getting. How can I help? What should I do? The short answer is sort of what I've said already. This is going to work best when the person who is suffering, either suffering from active addiction or not in active use, but not doing what they need to fully recover, when the person wants help themselves. We can make resources available. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. And there is an entire program, a 12-step program as well, called Al-Anon. And Al-Anon exists for the friends and family of alcoholics. It exists to help them deal with the ravages of alcoholism and other addiction in their families without trying to make people do things that they're not ready to do. In other words, ultimately, the teaching of a lot of traditional recovery programs is there may not be that much you can do to help your loved one. What you can do is help yourself. What you can do is help yourself, and you don't have to do it alone. And there's a lot of support. There's a lot more to say on this topic, but for me, and in my experience, again, people have had only limited interest in my advice on what they ought to do, unless and until they come to a point where they themselves are ready to ask for help and are actually ready to listen. Now, having said that, there is a concept that I am not expert in. I have been taught this relatively recently. There's a concept called motivational interviewing. There's also from the WSBA, another link I've put here on tips for effective communication. You can ask people questions. The thing that we can always do is ask people questions. So, for example, I might ask my friend, how are you doing in your recovery? And she says, not very well. And I say, why is that? And she tells me, and she explains that she has stopped taking her medicine. And then I ask her why, and she tells me. the idea of motivational interviewing is to help the person in recovery or seeking recovery identify where they're at, where they would like to get to, and what the barriers are. More than that, the idea, and the important idea, I think, is really to learn to just show up for people, ask some questions, and listen compassionately. I have a good friend in recovery who says, look, my job whenever I'm working with somebody who wants to recover is to just show up, ask them how they're doing, and shut up and listen. Now, for a man who has so far been talking for 70 minutes without taking a breath, that's not easy. But that is, in a lot of ways, the most effective thing I can do to help other people in recovery. So some good tips there from the Washington State Bar Association. Motivational interviewing is the subject of entire college classes, or not college classes, probably therapy classes. I have not explained it well, but there are other ways to get into that. Okay, self-help meetings. Even during COVID. So a couple of things here. I have put self-help in quotes. When I talk about self-help meetings, I mean all kinds of different meetings, including 12-step meetings. The reason self-help is in quotations here is AA is actually not a self-help program. AA is a program not where you fix yourself, but rather you realize that you haven't done a very good job at fixing yourself, that you need help, and you show up, you become part of a community that is mutually supportive, and you try to learn some new ways of living, and those things help you stay sober. I want to say again, AA is, well, look, I went to AA to stop drinking, but honestly, not everybody stops drinking with AA. Some people need to go to detox. Some people need medically assisted treatment, medications. Some people need inpatient treatment. AA acknowledges that people need different things sometimes in order to stop drinking. What AA really is a thing that helps people stay sober once they've gotten sober. And that's what it's been for me. I mentioned a while ago that there have been folks who have struggled with access to meetings during COVID, that people don't meet in person anymore. And that's true. But what happened on or about March 11th, when most of the world, at least our part of the world, shut down overnight, is that the entire 12-step world migrated to Zoom, to this platform that we're using right now. I personally started hosting 4 meetings a week on Zoom. And, one of those, so the one that's most thrilling to me is, it's a Marijuana Anonymous meeting. It was started out here in Port Townsend, and it was 2 people sitting around in a room looking at each other. That 2 potheads in Port Townsend sitting in the room talking to each other for a couple of years about not smoking marijuana. And then Zoom and COVID hit, and it is now routinely 40 people on a Zoom meeting from literally all over the world. The last meeting I hosted, there was a woman there from Turkey, a woman from the Netherlands, a man from Nigeria, people from Canada, people from all over the United States. So what's been interesting about the pandemic is that it is both, in some sense, it has kind of made the barriers to treatment more significant, but in other ways it has made them lower. One of the things I notice in Zoom is that younger people seem to be more willing to show up for a Zoom meeting than they would be to walk into a church basement or a community center. The UNBAR group of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I've been involved with since I got sober, was for a while, well, it had gotten small because a number of people had retired and moved out of town. When COVID hit, the meeting was reborn, and it is now a robust meeting. It meets, by the way, at 12:15 on Wednesdays. I think I have in here the information for connecting to it, and it welcomes anybody who is either a lawyer or sort of in the legal community, adjacent to the legal community. The link I've given here under self-help meetings is to a study that's come out pretty recently, I think this year, on the effectiveness of 12-step recovery. There's been a lot of debate in the substance abuse treatment community about whether AA works or not. There is science to show that it does, and I can tell you it sure worked for me. Okay, let's see. I also want to mention a couple of other important things here. So I mentioned that not everybody gets sober just using going to an AA meeting. By the way, there are 12-step meetings for every kind of addiction you can think of. So alcohol, marijuana, there's Narcotics Anonymous, there's Cocaine Anonymous, there's Gamblers Anonymous, there's Overeater Anonymous, which I need to go to but haven't yet, and I'm sure there are many others that I don't even know about. Treatment alternatives, many people benefit from some sort of inpatient treatment. So being treated in a facility where you just stay at the facility for the first 30, 60, 90 days, something like that. There are excellent treatment facilities in our sort of general Northwest area. There's one over in, I think it's Yakima, called Sundown. There's Hazelden has facilities in Minnesota and here. That's a great organization. These are programs that frankly are a benefit to the affluent, because for the most part, I don't know really the detail of how much insurance will pay, but these are not helping the folks in our homeless encampments. These are helping folks who have jobs. But there is a lot of good inpatient treatment options. There are as well intensive outpatient treatment programs. A lot of people do a program where they don't actually go and stay in a facility. They're treated outpatient, and a lot of that's being done on Zoom now as well. I need to briefly mention MAT, and there's this is a you could get board certified in medicine in this now. So this will be sort of the short version. There are very good medications now available for treating people with opiate use disorder, meaning folks who are either addicted to prescription narcotics or to heroin. The one you would hear about the most is buprenorphine, which is also called Suboxone. That is prescribed both to, it's prescribed once folks have come through withdrawal. It prevents them from getting high if they use heroin on top of it, and it sort of eases cravings. Another drug that's being used a lot is naltrexone. It's administered differently, and it can also be used for alcoholism, and there's some people who are pretty pro on that. And I need to mention a drug called naloxone. That is a drug that police and emergency medical personnel carry. It's administered to folks in overdose, and it will bring them rapidly out of overdose and revive them, and it saves a lot of lives. Okay, a couple more things. I'm going to tick through these quickly so we have a couple minutes for questions. So resources. These will be in the slides, obviously. This is something my children taught me. That stands for let me Google that for you. Really, obviously, anything you want to know about, just Google it. It's really easy to find. This is the email address for the UNBAR. That's also findable on the WSBA website under the wellness program. If you're interested in joining us at the UNBAR, email us and we'll get you the credentials. There's a ton of resources on the WSBA site. If you're looking to attend meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, go to that website. You can go to a 12-step meeting literally anywhere in the world, any time of day, right now for any kind of an addiction, because it's all online now. But this is where you would find Seattle-based meetings. This is the website for Marijuana Anonymous in Seattle. In Seattle, you can find Marijuana Anonymous meetings. This is a pretty neat site. This is the University of Washington has a, let's see, I think it's Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute is what it's called, the ADAI. It's a, it's a research institute and an information clearinghouse, and all kinds of good information and resources, including ways and places to get help available on this website. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of books. I don't really know how young this group is, but there's a lot of books on this subject too. We've talked a little bit about this one. The language is dated. It was written in, I want to say 35, something. I should know this, but it's written in the 1930s. I love it. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but the information is fundamentally sound and super helpful. If you or someone you know is wrestling with alcoholism, it's a great place to start. Marijuana Anonymous has a book called Life with Hope. That Narcotics Anonymous has a book. This is a super fun book, Recovery by Russell Brand. Yes, Russell Brand, the British comic. Again, it is actually just a treatment of the same material that's in here, but with his British acerbic wit wrapped around it. It's a lot of fun. It's good information. In the realm of the hungry ghosts, a little more academic. Gabor Mate is a addiction medicine doctor in Vancouver, BC. It's a really, it is not a 12-step work. It is a really well thought through model of addiction. What drives it, how to treat it. I got a lot out of that. This is the one of the Al-Anon texts. Let me take a breath. I have a couple more things to talk about, but do we, Amy and Veronica, do we have any questions? Or has everybody just gone to sleep, you think?
Nothing submitted so far.
Okay. Well, folks, we got 8 more minutes. I can talk for 8 more minutes, and I will. This would be, if you have any questions, this would be the time to jump in. I'm going to talk about a couple other things and see if anybody has any. So a lot of the insight that is in 12-step recovery, a lot of what you can learn in any of those books that I just went through, a lot of what you will hear if you go to meetings, or even if you go to an inpatient treatment program, is either dead obvious or ancient wisdom, or both. The way you recover from addiction is to get to a place where you're ready to stop, do whatever you have to do to stop, which may include going to a hospital, it may not, and then figure out a way to stay sane enough and in a safe enough situation for you that you don't have to start doing it again. There is a unique insight in 12-step recovery, which has changed my life. And the unique insight is that the way you stay sober and in lasting recovery is by trying to be useful to other addicts in recovery. It is the ultimate sort of pyramid scheme, but in a good way. My sobriety depends upon my activity in trying to help other addicts stay sober. One of the things I have gotten involved with as a result of that, I really commend highly to you folks. It's called the Recovery Cafe. I've given you the link to the Recovery Cafe in downtown Seattle. It is I would call it a big tent recovery organization. The Recovery Cafe is it's in the Boren Triangle, where Boren, Denny, and one other, I can't remember, it's South Lake Union, come together. And it's both a place and a charitable institution. The place is the population that uses it is largely our urban street population. They offer free meals. The model is if you want a free meal, you become a part of the community, you give back to the community, and you don't drink or use while you're at the facility. It's a wonderful organization, and one of the things I like about it is it is ecumenical in the sense that they're very open-minded and endorsing and supportive of lots of different ways to recovery. You've heard me talk a lot today about recovery through the 12 steps. That's what worked for me. But my basic view is I want people to get better any way they can. And so, whether that's medically assisted treatment, whether that's detox, whether that's 12-step recovery, whether that's, there's a Buddhist version of the 12 steps. It's called refuge recovery. There's a thing called smart recovery. You can Google any of these things. There's a thing called moderation management, all kinds of different ways. And the Recovery Cafe supports all of those things. I'm engaged with it because it is a way for me to stay sober. The other key insight here is we don't do this alone. The hardest thing certainly for lawyers, and this gets back, I think, to the sort of the way the profession works, is to ask for help. I have a problem I can't solve myself. Well, that is anathema to lawyers. But in fact, my main advice is ask for help, ask for help, ask for help. Those are the things I wanted to say. I could do one more slide if people want me to.
And David, we do have one question. It says they realize there's no right or wrong answer, but as administrators, in your perspective, should we stop together arranging firm social events that involve alcohol? As you pointed out, there's a lot of Zoom happy hours, and it's very much a part of our culture.
Yeah, that's a great question. Our firm has changed around that a lot over the years, and until COVID, we still had an annual firm event that involved alcohol. I guess I would say no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do it just for that reason. But I would also be mindful of let's not glorify something that's dangerous for a minority of us. So I think it's possible to maintain a balance. I tell you the other thing I would really recommend you do if you do these once we get back to normal. We've always insisted that if people are going to drink, they don't drive. So we're big on cab vouchers. The last slide I have ties into this a little bit. The things that I think help in the environment. And I get that as a firm administrator, you don't get to create the environment all by yourself. I get that at the end of the day, most law firms, the people actually setting the culture are probably the senior lawyers in the law firm. But you've got a voice. You've got a voice. You would not be firm administrators if they didn't think you were capable and competent and want to hear what you think. And these are the things that I think build a healthy community. These are the things that I think build a healthy team. None of these are like remarkable, right? These are all just, I assume you look at this list and go, duh. But these are the things that make people want to come make a contribution and work in a healthy way, not, we have a hell of a party and we get wasted. Look, I think it's important. I personally do not want to be the voice of abstinence. Abstinence is something I have to do. I don't wish it on anybody else. I have to do it because I have a disease. So I don't wish to be the voice of abstinence. I do, though, do though think you should be careful about glorifying it if you can thread that needle. So that is both my answer to that question and my final slide.
Do we have any more questions?
I was going to ask David, you talked about, in terms of helping others, waiting until they're ready to be helped, and the value of, the peer support model, and then putting them in touch with maybe someone who is going through recovery themselves. How do you recommend someone get to that point where they can, highlight to a loved one or a coworker, or, what have you, like, hey, I think you might have a problem. You may not realize it, but here's what I'm seeing. What, I guess, resources or approaches to getting to that point can you offer?
Right. I think so this gets back to the sort of, the term is wonky, the motivational interviewing idea, though. The idea of asking questions. So let's say, and I've had this. Let's say I had a young lawyer working for the law firm who didn't show up for work, didn't do key tasks that were assigned, and somebody was calling to find out where another staff member was who maybe had gone home with him or something. Just there was like a whole bunch of drama and non-performance. I think there's nothing wrong with, and I think it's necessary to have a conversation with that person where you ask them, so what happened? Why did this happen? Why did this work not get done? Now the problem is, they're going to lie, because I tell you what, addicts and alcoholics will lie a lot. And then you're stuck. But what you've done is you've introduced discomfort. And certainly for me at least, ultimately, I didn't really emphasize this in telling my story, but ultimately it was the lying to myself that I was doing in the last 5 years or something of my addiction that drove me to so much discomfort that I couldn't proceed. So I guess what I would say is ask questions and manage performance. And hope for the best, because look, left untreated, these things are just devastating. So, and I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me. That's for sure. So, there is the Bar Association has a set of mechanisms around this. I honestly don't know what they are. When I get involved with the Bar Association occasionally will refer people to me to talk to them. For example, I've met with lawyers who were having a problem as part of like a diversion agreement of some sort. But I'm not involved on the front end, and I honestly don't know how that works. But I think the coercive process is going to be only occasionally effective. At the end of the day, I've sort of bought into the model that people have got to come to their own pain point, and it's different for everybody. Okay.
Thank you.
Looks like we have no other questions. Thank you, David. Thank you for your honesty and your experience. We appreciate you and your time. I want to thank the attendees for taking time out of your day to attend. If you would like a recording of today's session, please reach out to Melissa at AMI. Her contact information is in the registration email. Darian Fleming will be back with us on February 4th to teach us how to manage ourselves during stressful times with self-regulation. Have a good day, stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.